Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back to our journey down the road to somewhere. Today we are in our actually fourth episode of Season 2. And Season 2, of course, is taking place as we go down Route 66 through the state of Missouri. And as we go through the state of Missouri and make our 12 stops along the way, this is the fourth. And remember, we're going to do 6 episodes, and then we're going to take a break because of Easter. And during that time, the 12 episodes, though, will relate to the history of Israel from the end of the Pentateuch or the Torah all the way up through the return out of captivity. So it's quite a lengthy section of the history of Israel and quite important. And today we're going to be looking at what is one of the critical turning points really in the history of Israel, where Israel is actually going to get a king, and it will cease being simply a theocracy with God as king and a tribal confederacy, and will now become a monarchy. So for those of you that might be jumping in at this point in time, just real briefly, I'm taking the group that's watching through a little bit of an overview of my book, The Road to Somewhere. That book was written with the intention of trying to encourage people to go to watch the 66 videos that I recorded back a number of years ago, each one that gives an overview of an entire book of the Bible. So every stop, and again, the theme behind the book is that John Calvin, who was the main character in the prequel, Somewhere Fast, and Joy Jardine, who is a videographer, have been hired to make 66 short videos that actually go with those 66 longer lectures. And so at each stop, John, who is the narrator, will give a little bit of a history of the stop on Route 66, but then we'll transition over to do a little bit of a teaser on the lecture on the larger book by introducing the book. I did want to say, by the way, I've reminded you on a number of occasions that the link to that video is in your email, along with the link to this session. But I also forgot, I went back and was watching what we shot last week, that Baker, my son, has created in the lower left-hand corner of this video. At the end of it, you'll see a little box in the lower left-hand side, and if you click on that, it will immediately take you over then to the longer teaching on the book that we've been talking about just briefly in the video. So Joy and John in the book have been heading down Route 66 again. They are in Missouri now, and you might remember in our last episode together, they had stopped in Sullivan, Missouri, and Sullivan, Missouri was known for these fire hydrants. I think there are 60 of them that local artists have painted, and about half of those have a Route 66 theme. In the book, this happens to be the fire hydrant that they actually stop in front of. It has a Route 66 logo. It's got Maryland on one side and Elvis on the other. So they shot their video there in Sullivan, Missouri. Today, they're going to move down the road just a little bit, about 20 miles, and they're going to be coming to the small town of Cuba. Whoops, let's go back here one second. The small town of Cuba, Missouri. Cuba was a town that was founded in 1857. It has a population of around 3,000. And by the way, when you hear that word, obviously you automatically think of the nation or the island of Cuba. And actually, in 1857, that was what this town was named for. Excuse me. I have a little bit of a glitch here going on. I better take a drink of water, okay? All right. So, Joy and John come to Cuba. Now, Cuba has its own uniqueness that it's known for. It's not fire hydrants, but what Cuba is known as is the mural city. Because in Cuba there are 16 buildings in this small town where murals have been painted along the side of the building. By the way, this little graphic, which says Happy 90th Route 66, is a couple of years old. We're coming up in 2 years. In 2026, Route 66 will celebrate its 100th anniversary. And I imagine it's going to be quite a wild time on the road that year with people from all over the world coming to observe that. So, Cuba's a mural city, and in the book what happens is that Joy and John, they drive around the city a little bit trying to figure out which of the murals that are there in Cuba they want to use as a backdrop for filming their little video. And they finally come to a shop called Danny's Gas Hole here. And because the mural incorporates Route 66, has an old Corvette in it, has a Harley, they decide that they'll shoot their little video there in front of this mural. And what will happen is they'll pull the new Corvette up in a way so that it kind of is near that older, like 60s Corvette, just to give a little bit of a contrast. And then John, in the book, he gives just a little short history of the city of Cuba. And then, as is true in each of these short videos that they're shooting, he then transitions over to a book of the Bible. And the book of the Bible that comes next, after what they have already been through earlier on their journey, is the book of 1 Samuel. And again, 1 Samuel is the story of how Israel gets a king. And again, transitions from a tribal confederacy over to a monarchy. It's a very interesting story, and actually you get the sense as you read 1 Samuel particularly that this was not the perfect plan of God. I think the perfect plan of God was for Israel to remain a theocracy and for the 12 tribes to live together in peace and harmony and to become a great nation where God was their king. Back 2 sessions ago, we went through the book of Judges, and there's a sense in which I think the book of Judges was actually written to lead up to what we look at today. Historically or traditionally, scholars think that Judges was actually written by Samuel, who's one of the main characters in the book of 1 Samuel. Again, it covered those 400 years of Israel's history, and again, it just seemed like it was a disaster after a disaster. And so we're going to see what that leads to now in 1 Samuel. And one of the ways to remember 1 Samuel, and again, just giving you a little bit of a quick teaser in order to encourage you to watch the main video, you can remember it because there are 3 main characters in the book of 1 Samuel. And the first of those characters is actually Samuel himself. Now, Samuel has a great story in the scriptures, and I'm not going to go into his early life and birth. You need to watch the video to see that piece of the story, but it's really interesting. Part of it revolves around how he gets his name Samuel, because Samuel comes from 2 Hebrew words. the Hebrew word shema, which is the word for to hear, and the Hebrew word el, which is one of the more generic words for God. And so the word Samuel literally means God hears, or he hears God. And both of those things would really apply to the story. So you really need to watch that origin story on the longer video. But Samuel grows up and he hears God. He becomes a prophet, and there hasn't been a prophet in many years in Israel at the time that Samuel begins to receive messages from God, which was what a prophet did. God spoke to them, and then they would speak to the people. And so Samuel becomes a prophet, and in a sense, he's also the last judge of Israel. So he's serving kind of a dual role there. But remember that in the book of Judges, and again, which we think Samuel might have compiled all of that history, 3 different times, maybe even 4, I can't remember, at the end of the book, the phrase appears that in those days there was no king in Israel. So 1 Samuel opens up, and after Samuel has grown up and begins to, again, hear from God, the people come to him, the Israelites, and they come to him with a request, and they basically say to him, "We want a king just like everyone else has." Now, again, in the text, you get the sense that, first of all, Samuel isn't very happy about that request. And then God says to Samuel, you don't need to be angry. It's not really you they're rejecting, but they're rejecting me as their king. And God says to Samuel, go ahead and give them a king. I'll show you who is to be king, but also tell them the conditions. What will it mean to have a king now rule over you? And even though Samuel, in the book of 1 Samuel, goes through a whole series of what would seem like kind of negative conditions that the people will have to endure if they had a king, and yet they come back and they say to Samuel, no, we want to be just like the other nations. Now, it's ironic that they say that, because the whole purpose that God created Israel was that they might be different from the other nations, and that they might be used by God to be a blessing to the other people. But the people of Israel, they want to be just like the other nations, and so they want a king. And God then leads Samuel to the second main character in the story, and that is a man by the name of Saul. Now, again, in the book, and in just a little bit of a teaser that John gives in the novel, what we see is that Saul is chosen by God. He is anointed by Samuel, which was the practice with which a king would be designated as the king. And then we're even told that the Holy Spirit comes upon him in order to enable him to be a king. We're told a couple of things about Saul, and it's interesting because later these won't necessarily be viewed as positive characteristics, but what we're told about him in the book is that he's handsome, so he's a good-looking fellow. We're told that he's tall, that he's actually stands a head taller than any of the other Israelites. And of course, he was Semitic, and so he probably would have been a little bit darker, so he would have been tall, dark, and handsome, just exactly what you might expect from a king. And he's 30 years old when Saul anoints him, and in the book of 1 Samuel, he is going to be the king of Israel for 40 years. Now, Saul gets off to a good start, and right away, again, as the Spirit comes upon him, The Israelites are attacked by the Ammonite army, which is one of the nations that, again, is surrounding Israel. And Saul is able now, rather than simply calling together an army from one specific tribe, is able to assemble an army out of several of the tribes and to go to battle against the Ammonites, and they win. Israel wins that battle. So again, it sort of is a shift from the book of Judges, where every time an enemy invaded them, they conquered them. And now, in this situation, we have a little bit different picture at the moment, where Israel itself is victorious. Well, the real dilemma that happens in the book of 1 Samuel is that almost immediately after this, Samuel begins to get off track. And again, this is something you'll need to watch the video to see all of the situations that occur. Samuel doesn't get off track. Saul gets off track. Samuel has to confront him on a number of occasions. But there's a sense in which the book of 1 Samuel is the story of 40 years of personal decline of the king Saul. And on a number of occasions, God will actually make a statement like, I'm sorry that I picked him. And even though he had all of the outer characteristics of a king, again, tall, dark, and handsome, what he didn't have was the kind of heart that God was looking for. And God makes a famous statement in the book that man looks on the outer things, but God looks at the heart, and that he was looking for a man after his own heart. And we'll see what happens as a result of that. But really, after this 40 years of decline, which again, you can see some detail in the video, his life really ends in tragedy. And the final chapter of 1 Samuel tells us how Saul's life comes to an end. And again, it's a very sad and tragic story where his sons are killed. He's at war against the Philistines. The Philistines wound him, and in order not to be captured alive and tortured and abused, he takes his own sword and falls on it, and he kills himself. And that's the end of the reign of Saul. So it's a real interesting story, and it's again, I see it as a tragedy. But in the midst of his reign, part of what happens is that we're really introduced to the third main character, and that is a young man by the name of David. David gets introduced to us here in 1 Samuel, and then 2 Samuel, the entire book almost, will be about the reign of David as king of Israel. There's a great scene, and again, it's talked about more in the video, where God shows Samuel which of Jesse's sons is to be the next king. Now, this kind of ties back again to the book of Ruth, if you think about it, because remember, at the end of the book of Ruth, we're given a very brief sort of a genealogy of David, where Ruth marries Boaz. They have a son named Obed. When Obed is old enough to be married, he has a son named Jesse. And Jesse's going to have 8 sons. And out of those 8 sons will come the next king of Israel. And again, it's a great little story of how each of the sons of Jesse is paraded before Samuel, and God keeps saying, this isn't the one, this isn't the one. And after 7 of the sons have gone by, Samuel asks Jesse, is this, are this all of your sons? And to which Jesse replies, well, the younger one is actually out taking care of the sheep. And they call in the youngest son, who is in fact David. And God, of course, says to David, this is the one. And in 1 Samuel, David plays a little bit of a different role. He actually gets anointed as a young man as king, even though he's not going to become king for years to come until Saul dies, but he will be the next king. And he's a musician. We know this because we're told that he played the lyre, which is sort of a small harp. And of course, he began writing songs, some of which, even at this age, as a young man, are songs that get incorporated into the book of Psalms, because the book of Psalms is 150 lyrics from songs that were used in the worship of Israel. Half of those were written by David. So he's a musician and he's a shepherd, which gives him insight into people. And so again, he'll use that background in some of the Psalms. He also becomes best friends with the king's son, Jonathan, and there's a lot of drama that takes place around that. And as a young man, and almost everybody knows this story, they might not know where it comes from, but again, as a young man, he goes up against the giant Goliath, a Philistine from the town of Gath, and he takes on Goliath, and of course he kills Goliath. And it's one of the, again, great stories of the Old Testament. And out of that and some other adventures where David actually goes and fights against the enemies of Israel, there's a growing popularity. The people begin to develop this affection for David, and the more popular he becomes, the more jealous Saul becomes. And there's even times when Saul tries to kill David. There's opportunities that David has to kill Saul, which he doesn't take because he's not going to kill the Lord's anointed. But he becomes quite popular. And in 2 Samuel, we're going to see really how he becomes king and what his reign looks like. Now, remember, by the way, the 1st and 2nd Samuel in the Hebrew Bible were simply one book. And so there wasn't a break. They flowed together. When the English version of the Bible, of the Hebrew Bible, was put together, some of these books were split. So Kings was one book in the Hebrew Bible, Chronicles was one book. It's the reason why we have the exact same content in our Old Testament as in the Hebrew Bible, the Tanakh, except they only have 22, depending on how it's arranged, to 24 books, and we have 39. It's the same content, but we've divided some of those books up. And so, again, this 1 Samuel is setting up 2 Samuel. At the end of his little introduction to the book, John encourages his audience to watch the video on the book of 1 Samuel. And again, you have both a link to that, or you can immediately go to that box that's down in your left-hand corner. It'll take you right to the video on 1 Samuel. So at this point in time, John and Joy, they leave Cuba and they begin to head down Route 66. Their next stop is going to be Rolla, Missouri, and it has a couple of very unique characteristics that we'll look at next week, particularly where they decide to shoot the video at a very unique spot. But part of what happens at this point is that for the very first time as they leave Cuba, Joy takes the wheel of this hot Corvette that they are driving down Route 66, and she kind of puts the pedal to the metal and takes off and gets a chance to drive the Corvette. And she'll drive it then to Rolla, and that will be where John introduces both the town and 2 Samuel, and that's what our next episode will be, episode 5 of season 2, and we will pick up there next week. So thanks for jumping in and joining us. And again, let me encourage you, really the objective, not only of The Road to Somewhere, the book, but the objective of these short videos is to get you over to look at the longer video that gives you a more comprehensive overview of the whole book. So thanks for joining in, and again, we'll see you next week.